Tian Yang stood there, completely dazed, even long after Renshaw had left. Eventually, almost absent-mindedly, he lifted his hand and touched the spot where Renshaw had kissed him. The warmth was still there. However, Huang Xiaoli's smiling face suddenly appeared in his mind, instantly snapping him out of his daze. Cultivation was right. She's a dangerous and unpredictable woman. I need to be especially careful when around her, Tian Yang thought to himself as he left the Celestial Sword Sect. After leaving the Celestial Sword Sect, Tian Yang traveled deep into the wilderness, searching for a secluded area away from prying eyes. Once he found a desolate, untouched area, he finally set his focus on something he had long neglected, his martial techniques. Although his cultivation base had grown significantly over the past 50 years, his martial techniques remained stagnant. During his time in Han Zexian's cavern, his mind had been entirely consumed by the diary and the engravings on the walls, leaving little to no time for him to practice his martial techniques. While Tian Yang trained, Renshaw tried to acquire information on Cultivation. The first person she went to for such information was naturally her own family. Coincidentally, Renshaw's mother paid her a visit at the Celestial Sword Sect just a few weeks after her meeting with Tian Yang. Seated within her courtyard, surrounded by the gentle rustling of flowers, Renshaw and her mother enjoyed their tea in peaceful harmony. Their conversation was light and pleasant at first, with her mother inquiring about her time at the sect, her progress in cultivation, and any challenges she had faced. Renshaw responded with ease, sharing details of her breakthroughs and training progress. However, as the conversation continued, Renshaw eventually brought up Cultivation, a name she hadn't mentioned to her family for decades. "Mother, this may sound random, but have you heard from or about Cultivation recently?" The moment Renshaw spoke his name, her mother, who had just lifted her teacup to her lips, suddenly trembled. A faint ripple disturbed the surface of the tea as her fingers momentarily stiffened around the delicate porcelain. For a brief second, an unreadable expression flashed across her usually composed face, one that Renshaw had never seen before. Then, slowly, she lowered the cup, placing it carefully back onto the table. "Did something happen? You haven't mentioned him ever since your engagement was broken." Renshaw kept a calm demeanor and responded, "A friend mentioned him not long ago, and I realized that I haven't heard a word about him for over 50 years now. I don't care about his situation, but it does intrigue me how quiet he's been. Don't tell me he died." Her mother didn't immediately respond. Instead, a heavy silence settled between them, the only sound being the soft rustling of flowers in the gentle breeze. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "Sorry, but I also haven't heard from him or the Immortal Might clan recently." Her voice was calm, steady, too steady. "After your engagement was broken, our relationship with the Immortal Might clan hasn't been the same. It might take some time before things return to normal." On the surface, her words were logical and reasonable. But Renshaw knew better. She had spent a lifetime reading the subtle nuances in her mother's expressions and tone. And right now, her mother was lying. She wasn't just withholding information, she was deliberately hiding something from her. "Is that so?" Renshaw kept her cool and responded nonchalantly. "By the way, I wouldn't mind completely severing ties with the Immortal Might clan." Her mother shook her head and said, "You know that's not possible." "I know." As their meeting neared its end, Renshaw's mother set down her teacup and spoke with deliberate intent. "Before I leave, I need an answer for you know what." Renshaw's expression remained composed, her response almost instantaneous. "If you're talking about who my next fiancé will be, I am still considering my options." Her voice was calm, unaffected, as if she had expected this conversation from the very beginning. Despite how last-minute the question might have seemed, Renshaw knew this was the true reason for her mother's visit. "Your father and I both know you're trying to delay it as long as possible, but you really need to make up your mind soon, as it'll greatly our clan. We love you, but our patience has a limit, and it's running thin." "Of course, mother." Renshaw managed to keep a calm demeanor until the very end. Once her mother left, Renshaw's calm expression turned grim. "Love me? What a joke. I am nothing but an object with a price in their eyes," she coldly sneered. After failing to acquire any information on Cultivation from her family, Renshaw changed her methods, using more unorthodox methods. A few years later, in the midst of his training, Tianyong noticed the communication jade slip Renshaw had given him was trembling. He quickly answered it. Hello. I have the information you want. Renshaw's voice resounded from the jade slip, her tone calm but carrying an undertone that Tianyong couldn't quite place. Great. I'll come to meet you at the Celestial Sword Sect, Tianyong responded immediately. However, Renshaw quickly rejected the idea. No, let's meet somewhere else. I'll give you the location in a few days. The moment she said that, Tianyang's expression darkened slightly, and a bad feeling settled in his gut. Okay. And with that, their conversation ended. For the next several days, Tianyong waited anxiously for Renshaw to reach out again. A week later, Renshaw finally reached out with the location. I'll be there in 3 days, Tianyong replied. Okay. Without hesitation, Tianyong set out toward the destination. 3 days later, he arrived as promised, stepping into a private room at a quiet restaurant where Renshaw was already present. Yet, the setting was anything but ordinary. There was no food on the table, and Renshaw was in disguise. Are you? Tianyong hesitated, his gaze fixed on the woman before him. He was almost certain it was Renshaw, but a sliver of doubt remained. Was it truly her, or merely someone sent in her place to deliver her words? He needed to be sure. It's me, Renshaw said as she removed her disguise. I don't like this at all, Tianyong said with a frown. However, his unease wasn't directed at Renshaw but the room itself. The air felt heavy, the atmosphere unpleasant and oppressive. Please, sit down. Renshaw gestured at the seat across from her. Once Tianyong was seated, Renshaw began, before I talk about Culas, there's something you should know. Tianyong didn't say anything and allowed her to continue. Shortly after you clashed with the immortal clans outside the mountain, Renshaw revealed, her voice calm but laced with underlying tension, Patriarch Gu of the immortal Gu clan, the sect leader of the 7 divine sword peaks, and 2 other prominent figures from the immortal clans confronted me. They wanted to know about my connection to you after learning that I'd traveled with you for some time. Although I told them we only met through Culas and that I barely knew you, they refused to believe me, Renshaw continued. They accused me of conspiring against the immortal clans alongside Culas and you. A bitter smile tugged at her lips. Conspiring against the immortal clans. That's a stretch, Tianyong raised an eyebrow. You not only killed Patriarch Gu's son but also acquired Han Zexian's legacy, not to mention the limitless sword domain as well as other techniques. That's right, they also know that you'd acquired several techniques inside Han Zexian's tomb. Everything you've done seems directed at the immortal clans, so I am not surprised they think you are conspiring against them. So, nothing happened to you, right? Tianyong asked. I wouldn't be here if that were the case. Thanks for worrying about me, though, she smiled. Now, tell me about Culas, he said. I'll be honest, I don't have much information on Culas, and what information I managed to gather had cost me a fortune, she said. Get straight to the point. Renshaw stared at him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then, with a quiet sigh, she finally revealed, according to the information I obtained, Culas was taken away by the immortal Gu clan after you entered that mountain. Since then, he hasn't been seen or heard from by anyone, including his own family. Tianyang's expression darkened, but he remained silent as she continued. This information wasn't difficult to find, but as you know, it still took me several years to contact you. Anyway, the Immortal Might clan began pouring their resources into another heir shortly after Culas' disappearance. That only happens when the previous one is either dead, or no longer qualified. The weight of her words settled over the room, the unspoken implications pressing down like a suffocating force on Tianyong. Are you saying that Culas is dead? Tianyong roared, his voice shaking the room as his expression twisted with anger. His hands clenched into fists, veins bulging beneath his skin. The very idea was unbearable. Culas, gone. Just like that. Renshaw met his gaze steadily, unfazed by his outburst. I'm saying that, to the Immortal Might clan, he might as well be. Also, let me finish. After taking a deep breath, Renshaw continued, Culas isn't dead, but he's currently imprisoned in the Immortal Confinement Dungeon. Immortal Confinement Dungeon? Never heard of it, Tianyong frowned at this unfamiliar yet ominous name. I'm not surprised. It's a secret prison shared by the 9 immortal clans, she explained, her tone grave. A place reserved for those who have committed unforgivable offenses against them. Once someone is sent there, they are never seen again. Even within the immortal clans, only trusted members are aware of its existence. Tian Yang fell silent, deep in thought. A moment later, he asked, "Where is the immortal confinement dungeon?" Ren Sha's eyebrows shot up. "Don't tell me you're planning to break Kulas out of that place." Tian Yang scoffed. "Of course. Why else would I be asking? To bring him lunch." Ren Sha blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Of all the responses she had expected, sarcasm wasn't one of them. For a moment, she could only stare at him in a daze, unsure whether to be exasperated or impressed. Eventually, she snapped out of her daze and said, "Sorry, but I don't know. I told you that only trusted members of the immortal clans know about its existence, right? Well, even few people know its location. Aren't you the young lady of the Immortal Sword clan? Your status should be pretty high up there." "Of course it is, but that doesn't mean I know everything that happens within the immortal clans. Moreover, I am just a—" Ren Sha suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her expression flickering with bitterness, though it vanished almost instantly. She took a breath before continuing, her tone firmer. "Anyway, I cannot help you with this. If I dig any deeper, they'll start noticing, especially when it comes to information on the immortal confinement dungeon. Hell, I probably don't even have the funds to continue, as I am already near bankrupt from this favor." "Is that so?" Tian Yang murmured, his voice devoid of emotion as he fell into silence once more. Ren Sha watched him carefully, her eyes studying his expression. Finally, unable to hold back her curiosity, she asked, "So, what are you going to do now?" "My goal hasn't changed in the slightest. If Kulas is imprisoned within the immortal confinement dungeon, I will get him out of there," he declared. "And how in heaven's name are you going to do that? You don't even know its location. There are many ways to find out. Don't tell me you're going to kidnap someone from the immortal clans," Ren Sha said in a somewhat joking tone. Tian Yang glanced at her, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "That doesn't sound like a bad idea. You can't be serious," Ren Sha exclaimed, eyes widening in shock at Tian Yang's response. Tian Yang simply looked at her, unfazed. Ren Sha pressed on, "Even if you're actually considering kidnapping someone, they'd have to be of high enough status to know the location of the immortal confinement dungeon. Only elders of the immortal clans have access to that information. How strong are the elders of the immortal clans?" Tian Yang then asked. "Most of them are within the immortal ascension realm, but a few have already stepped into the realm of bronze immortals. They are not individuals you can simply kidnap and threaten," Ren Sha said, shaking her head at the absurdity of Tian Yang's plan. "If they're only at the immortal ascension realm, then it's doable." Ren Sha stared at him, utterly speechless. Immortal ascension cultivators weren't just powerful, they were on the cusp of true immortality, standing at the peak of the mortal world. Even among the immortal clans, they were revered as near invincible figures. The idea of kidnapping one was nothing short of madness. Unbelievable," she finally said, barely able to form the words. But Tian Yang's expression remained calm, composed, as if he had just stated the most ordinary thing in the world. Then, in the next moment, Tian Yang let a sliver of his cultivation leak out. The air around him trembled, and an invisible force pressed down on the room like the weight of a mountain. Ren Sha's breath was caught in her throat. Her instinct screamed at her, her very soul recognizing the overwhelming presence before her. Immortal ascension. Impossible. She gasped, stumbling back as she shot to her feet. Her mind reeled. How could this be? Reaching the immortal ascension realm was a feat that required many millennia of effort, even for the most gifted cultivators. Yet Tian Yang, who had once been beneath her in cultivation, now stood at such a level. "So, do you still think I won't be able to kidnap one?" Tian Yang said a moment later. As the realization sank in, a chill ran down Ren Sha's spine. If Tian Yang was already at this level, then perhaps kidnapping an elder wasn't just reckless madness. Did you really acquire Han Zexian's legacy?" Ren Sha asked, her voice unsteady as she swallowed hard. It was the only logical explanation for his unfathomable progress. Han Zexian, an existence shrouded in mystery, a legend whose legacy was said to contain insights and power that defied the heavens themselves. If Tian Yang had truly obtained it, then his meteoric rise in cultivation suddenly made sense. Tian Yang stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing the decision of whether to tell her the truth. Finally, he spoke. No, Han Zexian's legacy wasn't inside that mountain. What? Then what was inside that mountain? And how did you reach the immortal ascension realm in just 50 years? You were only at the peak of Spirit King back then. I cultivated, normally. Do you really expect me to believe that? Tian Yang shrugged. Anyway, thanks for the information. I'll be taking my leave now, Tian Yang said as he turned toward the door. Now that he had what he came for, there was no reason to linger. Wait, Renshaw suddenly stopped him. What? Can I take a look at you before you leave? The real you. Why? Tian Yang raised an eyebrow. It's not fair that only you get to see me without my disguise, she said. Quote. After a moment of silence, Tian Yang removed his disguise, revealing his handsome and mature appearance. He stood tall, his posture exuding quiet confidence. His sharp, well-defined features carried a mature elegance, his long hair neatly tied behind him. An otherworldly aura subtly radiated from him, ethereal and commanding. It wasn't something Renshaw could clearly define, but she could feel it pressing against her senses, vast and unfathomable. Tian Yang only revealed his true appearance for a few fleeting seconds before consuming another appearance-altering pill. His features shifted once more, concealing his identity beneath a new disguise. I doubt we'll see each other again, but until next time, he said casually. Without another glance, he stepped out of the room and disappeared. Renshaw, however, remained seated, unmoving. Even long after Tian Yang had left, she could still feel the remnants of his presence lingering in the air. Her face, inexplicably, was flushed with redness. She exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her chest, as if trying to steady something within her. This feeling, she muttered under her breath. She had never experienced anything like it before, yet somehow, she instantly knew what it was, and it was a feeling she never thought she would have. Renshaw exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if trying to dispel the thought. Sometime later, she disguised herself and left. Over the next few months, Renshaw found her thoughts drifting to Tian Yang more often than she cared to admit. No matter how much she tried to focus on her own affairs, his figure would surface in her mind. She also wondered when he would act and kidnap someone from the immortal clans. Though nothing had happened on the surface, a subtle shift in the air told her that something was happening behind the scenes. As someone born and raised within the 9 immortal clans, Renshaw could sense it. The way the atmosphere within the 9 immortal clans had changed, and the way their movements had grown more cautious and alert. It was as if something had stirred them awake, almost like beasts sensing an unseen predator lurking in the shadows. Eventually, the whispers could no longer be suppressed. The truth surfaced like cracks in a fragile dam, and Renshaw, as well as the public, finally learned what had been unfolding in the shadows. Members of the 9 immortal clans were ruthlessly being slain, with most of the victims belonging to the immortal Gu clan. While the public remained puzzled as to why the immortal clans were being targeted, and utterly shocked that someone would dare challenge them, the immortal clans themselves had little doubt about who was behind the killings. It's him. That bastard has finally decided to reveal himself after hiding like a rat for years. Patriarch Gu roared, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and excitement. I have been waiting for this moment. Shortly after it became clear that the members of the 9 immortal clans were being targeted and murdered, the head of each family gathered to discuss it. The last time the 9 immortal clans gathered in one place was before the opening of Han Zexian's tomb. It appears that someone is targeting the 9 immortal clans. Does anyone here have any idea who it might be? The Immortal Sword clan's patriarch started the conversation with a grim expression. The others in the room didn't say anything and turned to look at Patriarch Gu instead, as most of the victims belonged to his Immortal Gu clan. Noticing their gazes, Patriarch Gu calmly responded, yes, I know who this individual is. As a matter of fact, you guys do, too. What? Who? The others couldn't think of anyone. A cold smile appeared on Patriarch Gu's face as he continued, that bastard who went inside Han Zexian's legacy. What? He came out. A few of the people inside the room stood up from shock. When did something like that happen? A few years ago, Patriarch Gu calmly revealed. When the others heard this, they quickly frowned. What the hell? So you've been keeping this to yourself for several years now? Were you trying to capture him and acquire Han Zexian's legacy for yourself? The Patriarch of the Immortal Spring Clan said. Patriarch Gu shook his head and said, while it has been several years, he went into hiding the moment he escaped. I was going to notify you once I find any information about him, hence why I summoned everyone the moment he started attacking. After a brief pause, he continued, also, while it would be nice to acquire Han Zexian's legacy, my focus is still revenge. Although the others were still suspicious of his intentions, they decided to let him go for the time being to focus on Tianyang. So, do you know anything about his goal? Or is he just randomly attacking our members? Asked the Patriarch of the Immortal Yu clan. I am not certain of his goals, but if we consider what he said before entering Han Zexian's legacy, it's likely that he's just attacking us for revenge. Tianyang's voice suddenly resounded in their heads. Although it had been over 50 years, they could still remember Tianyang's every word vividly, as he was the only one who would dare to threaten them so openly. He was only at the peak of Spirit King 50 years ago. Even if he'd spent every second cultivating, he shouldn't be above Divine Grand Master, and I am already considering the possibility that he acquired Han Zexian's legacy, said Patriarch Gu. How should we deal with him? Someone asked. The room fell silent. Nobody in the room truly knew how to deal with Tianyang. The situation was unprecedented. The immortal clans had faced rebellions and even wars among themselves before, but never had a single individual dared to attack them so blatantly. Moreover, as the 9 immortal clans, they could not afford to act recklessly. They had their reputation and their dignity to uphold. If they reacted too aggressively or defensively, it would only prove that one man could threaten their authority, an embarrassment they could not allow. For now, we can only warn our members to stay alert. Each family should also send out a few disguised experts. With any luck, we'll catch him off guard, said the Patriarch of the Immortal Spirit Clan. It was a simple but practical plan. If Tianyang kept attacking the immortal clans at random, there was a good chance he'd run into one of the disguised experts, someone ready to take him down. No one objected. The meeting concluded swiftly, and the immortal clans wasted no time putting their plan into action. Before long, the members of the 9 immortal clans found themselves constantly glancing over their shoulders, wary of Tianyang's presence. Every trip outside became a risk, and every shadow was a potential threat. Yet, the killings did not cease. Day after day, members of the 9 immortal clans fell, including the disguised experts, their lives snuffed out without warning. Despite their precautions and vigilance, the death toll only grew, rising with each passing week. The once proud and arrogant members of the 9 immortal clans now hesitated to even step outside their homes without guards. Their confidence, once unshakable, had crumbled under the weight of fear. Eventually, the 9 immortal clans had no choice but to admit they had seriously underestimated Tianyang. What they once dismissed as the arrogance of an inexperienced cultivator had become a nightmare they could no longer ignore. We cannot allow this madness to persist any longer. Each time he slaughters one of our own and walks away unscathed, it is not just a slap to our faces, it is a humiliation carved into the very foundation of our legacy. The Patriarch of the Immortal Sword Clan thundered, his voice laced with fury as the 9 immortal clans convened for the second time, a full month after their first gathering. I agree. We should stop holding back and unleash our full might upon him. Though we will definitely lose face for using such force against a single individual, it is far preferable to being perceived as useless and vulnerable in the other's eyes, said the Patriarch of the Immortal Soul Clan, his tone laced with cold resolve. Let's take a vote. After a quick vote, it was decided that the 9 immortal clans would stop being so reserved to go after Tianyang with full force. When Ren Sha learned of this, she sighed inwardly, "What are you doing, Tianyang? Weren't you planning to abduct an elder for the location of the immortal confinement dungeon? Have you given up on recusing Kulas?" She couldn't comprehend why Tianyang was drawing so much attention to himself when such acts would only make it more difficult for him to recuse Kulas. Have you heard? Some madman has been waging war against the 9 immortal clans. I can't even begin to imagine what kind of grudge he must hold to go this far, Elder Jing remarked, her tone laced with curiosity and disbelief as she addressed the stunning woman before her within the immortal monastery. With everyone and their mother talking about it, it'd be a miracle not to know by now, Elder Sun replied in a tone of utter disinterest, as if the chaos shaking the 9 immortal clans was nothing more than idle gossip unworthy of her concern. Elder Jing fell silent, her gaze lingering on Elder Sun's face, once radiant, now clouded with an unspoken gloom. The reason behind her unhappiness was evident, yet Elder Jing dared not voice it, fearing that even the slightest mention might deepen the shadows in her companion's heart. Meanwhile, Renshaw found herself back at the Immortal Sword clan after being called back by her parents. Inside a quiet room, facing her parents, Renshaw spoke, "If you're worried about my safety, I would have been far safer at the Celestial Sword sect than here." However, her father merely sneered, as if he found her concern amusing. "That madman may be attacking the 9 immortal clans, but most of his victims belong to the Immortal GU clan. Our Immortal Sword clan has yet to suffer any casualties, which means there's a good chance we're not his target." Renshaw's eyes widened in surprise. "What? We haven't been attacked." When she had chosen to help Tianyang, she did so fully aware that it would bring harm to her own family, something she had already come to terms with. Patriarch Ren shook his head and said, "To begin with, this whole thing started with Jiu Lim. Our Immortal Sword clan has done nothing to offend him. That's..." Although Renshaw didn't fully understand the depth or reason behind Tianyang's hatred for the 9 immortal clans, she had a feeling it stemmed from more than just Jiu Lim. Even so, she chose to stay silent, knowing some things were better left unsaid. "Even if that madman attacked us, I'm confident you're strong enough to handle it alone," her mother added. After a brief pause, her father continued, "Anyway, the real reason we called you back today is to see whether you have come to a decision regarding your next partner." "It hasn't been that long since you last asked me," Renshaw said. "No, but a lot has happened, and we can no longer wait for you. If you don't have a decision by the time you leave this room, we will make the decision for you." Renshaw clenched her fists in frustration. Despite her brilliance and countless achievements, she knew that none of it would ever be enough to free her from the fate of being a mere pawn in a political marriage. After a moment of silence, she said, "Do as you wish. Now that I think about it, it doesn't matter who I marry since I won't have feelings for any of them." "Then we will do just that," her father responded with no hesitation in his voice. Her mother merely shook her head in silence. "If this is all, I would like to return to my cultivation," Renshaw said a moment later. "You may leave, but do not return to the Celestial Sword sect and stay home for now. I plan on inviting your future partner for dinner next week, after all." "I understand." Renshaw returned to her room shortly after and lay on her bed, her gaze empty as she stared at the ceiling in silence. After a while, she reached for a jade slip and held it above her, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion, contemplation, longing, or perhaps an unspoken resolve. She brought the jade slip to her lips and began mumbling, "It's me. Let's meet at the same place we last met in 5 days. I know you probably don't need my help, but I have a way to ensure you'll receive the location of the Immortal Confinement Dungeon with minimal risk. Don't worry, this isn't a trap, I swear on my soul." A few moments after Renshaw lowered her arm, Tianyang received her message. He held the jade slip in his hand with a pondering expression as he mulled over its contents. Though he trusted Renshaw to some extent, he didn't fully trust her. The timing was too convenient, not to mention that the 9 immortal clans had just declared war on him. There was a real possibility that Renshaw was trying to lure him into a trap. Yet, Tianyang couldn't bring himself to dismiss her message outright, mostly because of the tone of her voice. She hadn't sounded coerced, nor did she carry her usual composure. Instead, there was something else in her voice, something unguarded, almost fragile. It wasn't desperation, but a quiet distress, as if she were struggling with something she couldn't put into words. 5 days later, Renshaw arrived at the designated meeting place. "He'll come, right?" she murmured under her breath, uncertainty in her voice. Yet, even if Tianyang chose not to appear, she wouldn't blame him. Given the circumstances, his wariness was justified. A few hours later, the door to her room suddenly creaked open. Renshaw's body tensed as she instinctively turned toward the entrance, only to find an unfamiliar middle-aged man standing in the doorway. Yet, instead of confusion, a wave of relief washed over her. "You sure know how to make a lady wait," Renshaw said, swiftly regaining her composure. Her voice carried its usual teasing lilt, as if she hadn't spent hours anxiously anticipating this moment. I had to make sure I wasn't going to be ambushed, Tianyong said as he sat before her. Do you think so little of me? I already swore on my soul